My name is Ashley Riley, 35 years old, and I sold my tech company for $2 billion last year. My younger sister, Victoria, was always the favorite, the beautiful one. My husband, Ryan, was the charming venture capitalist who swept me off my feet. I never thought they would be the ones to try to kill me. The memory still haunts me, Victoria whispering, "Say hello to the sharks," as she shoved me off our yacht into the dark Pacific. Ryan just stood there smiling, but they never expected what happened next. Before I dive into this unbelievable story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you want to hear more shocking stories of family betrayal and unexpected comebacks. Trust me, you will want to hear how this ends. I grew up in Charleston, South Carolina, where summers smelled like jasmine. Our house was a brick colonial on a quiet street shaded by live oaks. Dad left for the courthouse in crisp shirts that never wrinkled, a respected attorney who knew every judge's birthday and every bailiff's first name. Mom walked to the middle school most mornings with a tote full of sheet music and pencils, humming scales as she locked the front door. Music and arguments, those were the languages of our home. I was the quiet one who listened more than I spoke. After dinner, when cicadas took over the soundtrack, I would retreat to the desk in my room with the thrift store desktop Dad bought from a client. The screen flickered whenever the air conditioner kicked on, but it felt like a portal. I taught myself basic code from library books with cracked spines. I loved the feeling of solving tiny puzzles, a stubborn loop finally behaving, a clumsy interface turning into something smooth. While other girls pinned photos of pop stars, I pinned diagrams of circuits next to my bed. Victoria, 2 years younger, was the opposite kind of bright light that dazzled rather than glowed. She could walk into any room and have 3 friends by the time appetizers arrived. At school events, teachers remembered my name because of test scores. They remembered hers because she volunteered to MC, then turned a fundraiser into a party. Her confidence felt effortless, the way the tide always knew where to go. Our parents loved us both, but the scale was never perfectly level. Mom sat through my regional science fair with genuine patience, but her face lit from within when Victoria played the flute solo, even when she missed a note. Dad congratulated me on math league wins, a warm, "Good work, kiddo," and a quick pat on the shoulder before checking email. With Victoria, he lingered, joking with her friends, telling them she got her smile from her mother and her humor from him. And none of it was cruel. It was just gravity, pulling attention toward the person who sparkled. There were rare, small moments that belonged to me. In 8th grade, I rebuilt an old laptop from 2 broken ones the school was about to toss. The principal shook my hand and said I had a future in whatever this tech thing turns into. That night, Dad took us for ice cream on King Street, and for once the story he told at the table was mine. I watched the way his colleagues nodded, impressed, and tucked that feeling into a private drawer. And the next week, Victoria was elected class president. My drawer closed, but it stayed. At home, our roles hardened into chores. I balanced the budget for Mom's spring concert, program printing, stand rental, the sheet music order she forgot, while Victoria drafted thank you notes in perfect penmanship and charmed the PTA into comping the reception. When Mom needed volunteers, I made spreadsheets. Victoria made eye contact. We were partners, in a way, building the same event from different rooms. At university, I lived more in the computer lab than in my dorm room. While other students went to football games or crowded into bars, I found myself absorbed in raw data streams and pattern recognition models. The turning point came during my junior year, when I began experimenting with emotional analysis through language patterns. It started as a psychology project, measuring sentiment in social media posts, but soon it became something larger. I built a prototype algorithm that could scan millions of messages and detect shifts in mood with eerie accuracy. At first, it predicted loneliness on a college forum. Then it picked up early signs of burnout among call center employees. I realized I was holding a key that corporations, advertisers, and eventually even governments would pay fortunes to unlock. I called it the Emotion Index. Professors dismissed it as too ambitious. My classmates were more interested in internships at big-name firms. But I couldn't shake the idea that this could become more than just an academic exercise. So I made the leap and founded a small startup, naming it MindSphere. I borrowed the name from my obsession with spheres of influence, how one emotion could ripple outward through an entire network. The beginning was brutal. My savings barely covered rent for a windowless apartment near campus. I ate bulk ramen and peanut butter sandwiches. Investors ignored me, preferring flashy apps with faster paths to monetization. For 2 years, rejection became routine. I would pitch, demonstrate, explain, and watch faces glaze over. They said, interesting, but too niche, or come back when you have traction. Meanwhile, I coded until my hands cramped. Nights bled into mornings, the glow of the monitor my only light. My few friends stopped inviting me out. I told myself the sacrifice was necessary. Still, I questioned whether I was simply digging my own grave in lines of Python. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. A major social platform was on the verge of scandal, reports of widespread depression among its teenage users. They were under government scrutiny, advertisers were pulling back, and the stock price was slipping. My algorithm, by then refined to scan billions of posts in real time, flagged the trend weeks before the crisis broke. I drafted a private report and somehow got it onto the desk of one of their executives. Within days, I was summoned to their San Francisco office. I sat across from a table of men in tailored suits, my laptop humming beside me. I showed them how MindSphere had not only detected the problem early, but could also forecast recovery paths depending on intervention strategies. They didn't speak for a long moment. Then one of them said simply, "How soon can you scale this?" Everything changed overnight. A 6-figure contract became my lifeline, and the company, once on the edge of collapse, stabilized. Word spread in the investor world. Suddenly, the same people who had dismissed me were calling nonstop. Venture capitalists sent emails at 3 in the morning. For the first time, I wasn't begging, I was choosing. We grew fast. I hired a team of young engineers who believed in me more than I believed in myself. We moved into a cramped office above a coffee shop, surviving on caffeine and adrenaline. MindSphere wasn't just a tool anymore, it was becoming a platform. Retailers used it to anticipate customer satisfaction dips. Media companies used it to gauge which shows would succeed before they even premiered. Even healthcare firms began testing it as an early warning system for patient mental health. But growth came with pressure. Every quarter was a test of survival. Competitors emerged, some blatantly copying my work. I lived in fear that we'd lose our lead. I pushed my team hard, sometimes too hard, and burned myself out repeatedly. There were nights I fell asleep on the office couch, shoes still on, only to wake up 3 hours later and keep going. Success looked glamorous from the outside, but from within it was constant chaos, servers crashing, investors demanding, clients threatening to walk away unless we delivered. But still, we endured. I became sharper, less naive. I learned to negotiate, to say no, to fight for ownership of what I had built. Each victory felt like another brick in a fortress I was constructing around myself. 7 years passed in a blur of product launches, board meetings, and sleepless nights. By then, MindSphere had grown into a company valued in the billions, with offices in 3 countries and clients across every major industry. When the acquisition offer came, I wasn't surprised. An international tech giant wanted to absorb us into their empire. The number they offered, $2 billion, was surreal. I remember staring at the contract in the boardroom, the digits blurring on the page. Everyone around me was ecstatic. My lawyers called it a once-in-a-lifetime exit. My team hugged, celebrated, and popped champagne. But inside, I felt something quieter. Relief, yes. Pride, of course. Yet also emptiness, as if all the years of obsession had condensed into a single wire transfer. I was 35, officially a billionaire, lauded in the press as a self-made innovator. And yet, beneath the spotlight, I wondered if the price I paid, loneliness, exhaustion, isolation, had hollowed me out. That was the paradox of my success. I had proven the world wrong, but I was still chasing the approval that had always eluded me in childhood. My family congratulated me, but their admiration still tilted toward Victoria's charm. My name was in Forbes, but I sat alone in hotel rooms scrolling through news feeds, asking myself what came next. And yet, despite the doubts, MindSphere had marked me forever. It was proof that discipline and vision could turn raw ideas into power. It gave me wealth I had never dreamed of. It gave me freedom, or so I believed then. At a tech conference in New York, I first heard Ryan Lee before I saw him. His voice carried down the corridor outside the keynote hall, measured, amused, confident. He was telling a story about losing a deal because he underestimated a woman who later built a unicorn. People laughed in that careful, admiring way reserved for men who never seemed to lose twice. When he turned toward me, I recognized the last name instantly. The Lees had been in finance for generations, quiet money, old plaques on museum walls, scholarships named after his grandfather. He wore a navy suit that looked like it had been cut directly onto his bones and a watch that didn't flash. He didn't introduce himself by credentials. He asked about my work and listened like it mattered. We were seated together on a panel about ethics and AI, my idea of a good time, his playground. He asked sharp questions that didn't feel like daggers, and when the session ended, he walked with me toward the press line, carrying my laptop as if that were the most natural thing in the world. "You built MindSphere from a dorm room," he said. "I want to hear the version that doesn't fit into a 3-minute answer." There was a humility to the way he framed it, curiosity wrapped in charm. He pursued me with a patience I mistook for respect. Flowers to the office that weren't extravagant but thoughtful, peonies because I'd mentioned once that their season felt like a countdown to summer. Soup delivered to my apartment when I caught a cold between flights. A handwritten note tucked into a book he knew I loved, underlining a line about choosing who sees your unfinished work. He didn't gawk at my success. He treated it like a weather system that moved through the room and could be read if you knew which way the wind blew. His family invited me to dinner at their townhouse on the Upper East Side, a museum kept alive by immaculate staff and the scent of beeswax. His mother spoke in the smooth phrases of women who have hosted diplomats. His father asked the kinds of questions that sound generous until you realize they're X-rays. "Where did your father clerk? What clubs sponsored your competitions?" I learned quickly that self-made is a story old money likes when it comes with references. Ryan sat close enough that our knees brushed under the table. He squeezed my hand when his mother praised Victoria's photos on social media after Googling me. "Your sister is stunning." I laughed it off. He changed the subject. And 6 months later, we were married in a ceremony that felt like a partnership signing disguised as a fairy tale. Victoria was the maid of honor, crying with happiness, mascara teardrops artfully placed. She hugged me so tightly my veil snagged on her bracelet. "You deserve the world," she said, and I tried to believe it. Ryan whispered vows that sounded like plans. "I will protect what we're building." There were lanterns in the trees and a jazz trio on the terrace and a photographer who knew how to make every frame look opulent but effortless. My board sent a bouquet large enough to hide behind. I danced with my father, who told me I'd always been brave. Like I always wanted to be. For the first few weeks, it was easy. We traveled between San Francisco and New York, adjusting to a rhythm that felt glamorous and exhausting. He read my investor updates at breakfast and told me I undersold myself. He texted me reminders to drink water before board meetings. I let myself relax into the idea that I didn't have to do everything alone anymore. The first crack arrived as a suggestion. "Your chair is terrific," he said casually one night, "but you could use a steadier hand for the next phase. Someone who can handle the old guard pressure when you take bigger risks." I stirred my tea and asked who he had in mind. He smiled at me like a teacher handing back a paper with an A. I could step in short term. Purely to absorb heat. "You stay CEO and visionary. I'll be the lightning rod." He said lightning rod like it was self-sacrifice, like it wasn't also a throne. I told him no. Gently at first, then with the firmness I reserve for boardrooms. "MindSphere needs an independent chair," I said. "Someone who isn't married to me and isn't attached to a legacy fund with competing interests." He nodded, slow, considering, and I saw it, just a flash, the steel in his gaze. It wasn't anger, it was calculation. A mental note being taken, variable not yet under control. He didn't push the next day. He doubled down on tenderness. He sent me a playlist labeled for launches and landings. He cooked pasta in our kitchen, moving with an ease that made me ache. He asked about my roadmap like a colleague, not a conqueror. But the asks kept appearing in new costumes. Let me sit in on your governance call, purely as a silent helper. Loop me into diligence. I can sniff out bad faith faster than your general counsel. Consider a small bylaw adjustment, nothing major, so we can move quickly when markets turn. Each request sounded like an umbrella he was holding over my head. Each one made the sky feel darker. Victoria, meanwhile, performed sisterly devotion like it was her job. She planned a surprise birthday dinner for me at a rooftop restaurant, cried again about how proud she was, and posted a slideshow with a caption that made me look like the luckiest woman alive. She and Ryan found a rhythm of banter that friends envied, the extrovert sibling and the charming husband. I told myself this was what families did, they merged. I told myself to stop seeing edges as knives. At work, the whispers began. A partner who had ignored my calls for years suddenly emailed to congratulate me on aligning with the Lees. A reporter asked if our governance would change to reflect new stewardship. My CFO forwarded a rumor that Ryan's fund was increasing its position in our largest enterprise customer. I asked Ryan about it in bed, careful joking. He laughed it off. You think I'd front-run my wife's company? Come on. He kissed my forehead and turned off the lamp. I lay awake cataloging the coincidences. He tried a different angle. You're so good at product, he said. Why carry the burden of politics too? Let me buffer you. I repeated my answer. No. He nodded, steel flashing again before melting into charm. You married a fixer, he said. Let me do what I do. I started noticing how often he introduced me with a qualifier. My wife, Ashley, she's brilliant at building teams. He'd tell a room full of men whose names appeared on donor walls. Or, she's a visionary, sometimes too visionary, which is why she needs someone like me to keep the trains moving. Everyone laughed because it sounded like affection. I laughed because it was easier than explaining that trains don't need conductors who own the tracks. The board invited him to a strategy retreat as a guest. He brought a leather portfolio embossed with his initials and a set of slides I hadn't seen. Context, he said lightly. On page 4 was an org chart with chairman, filled by a blank placeholder. On page 5 was a list of crisis scenarios and communication chains. His name wasn't written anywhere, but it existed in every arrow. After the session, I pulled him aside. You're crossing lines, I said. I won't have you shadowrunning my company. He looked at me for a long moment, and the tenderness dropped away. There it was again, the steel, cold and quiet. You think I want your job? He asked softly. I want to make sure you don't lose it. Then he smiled, and the room warmed by a degree, and everyone we passed on the way out told me how lucky I was. At night, I combed through governance documents, making small adjustments that looked procedural but tightened control where it needed tightening. I created buffers. I reminded myself that love and leverage should never share a ledger. When he asked again, joking this time, with a glass of wine in his hand, if I would reconsider the chair issue, just for optics, I told him I'd rather endure bad optics than bad outcomes. I'm not moving on this, I said. He held my gaze. The steel didn't blink. People say you can't pinpoint the exact moment you understand who someone is. But I can. It was at a gala, a fundraiser in a museum where his grandparents' names were carved into marble. A donor had cornered me to ask if MindSphere would consider softening its mental health reporting for certain clients. I said no. The donor turned to Ryan with a look that said, "Control her." Ryan's mouth smiled. His eyes did not. He stepped closer, hand on my back, and spoke for me in a tone that sounded protective until I realized it repositioned me as talent, not authority. The donor relaxed. I felt the floor tilt. On the ride home, I told him not to do that again. He watched the city run by the window and said nothing. When the car stopped, he opened my door and offered his hand like a gentleman from a painting. You married into a family that understands power, he said. I'm trying to help you keep yours. He closed the door with a softness that felt like the hinge of a trap. That night, I lay awake and admitted what I had been avoiding. There was a hardness in him I had refused to name. It wasn't rage or pettiness. It was something older and more disciplined, a strategy learned at tables where deals were made over crystal and lamb chops. After the $2 billion deal closed, the world went loud and then strangely quiet. Parties, interviews, congratulations, then the echo. In that hush, small sounds stood out. Ryan's phone buzzing after midnight. Flight confirmations that arrived on our shared iPad but vanished from his inbox. Miami day trip, he'd say, kissing my forehead and leaving before sunrise. The first time, I believed him. The third, I asked which fund he was meeting. Diversified group, he answered, eyes on the mirror, tying his tie with surgeon precision. Diversified. The word meant nothing and everything. Victoria began showing up more, arms full of bakery boxes and gossip. Just checking on my favorite billionaire, she'd sing, breezing through the door in a floral dress that smelled like citrus. She offered to organize my closet, insisted we do sister spa nights, and made herself indispensable in a way that felt practiced. If I worked late, I'd return to find her perched on our kitchen island, bare feet tucked under her like a child, laughing at something Ryan said. They were easy together, too easy, two people fluent in a language I had never wanted to learn. I told myself I was paranoid. Exhaustion does that. It sandpapers your trust until every surface feels sharp. But then the details multiplied. A stained cocktail napkin from a Miami hotel in Ryan's suit pocket. Victoria's car appearing on the gate logs at odd hours, including a night I was sure she was in Savannah visiting a friend. My name muttered when they thought I was out of earshot, followed by a clipped silence. I started sleeping with my phone under my pillow, an old habit from the earliest days of MindSphere when servers failed at 3 a.m. But now I was waiting for a different kind of alert. I didn't confront them. I built. It is the only thing I trust myself to do. In the quiet hours, I installed a layer of protection beneath the glossy veneer of our smart home, a second network with no broadcast SSID, a home server humming behind a false panel in my office, a set of microcameras disguised as outlet plates and lamp screws. I hardened the router, mirrored the traffic, and set triggers, keywords, account numbers, sudden spikes to known offshore jurisdictions. I added a keystroke logger to the upstairs study computer. I seeded my own laptop with a honey vial named extratrust.pdf that would text me if anyone opened it. I told myself I was saving our marriage from shadows by turning them into light. And the light was ugly. The first capture was audio from the breakfast nook at 10:12 p.m. on a Wednesday when I was supposedly in Palo Alto. I watched the timestamp and listened to the clink of ice in a glass. Ryan's voice, careful, almost bored. We need to align documents. The trust won't trigger without probate unless she pause. Victoria's voice, soft and incredulous unless she what? Ryan signs the amendment. Or another pause. Then the soft scrape of a chair. Victoria again, lighter, like she was practicing a line. Hypothetically, how many days would it take to receive the money after her death? My heart stuttered. Ryan's answer was bare metal. No more than 3. I played it again because my brain refused to accept what my ears had swallowed. Words can be clumsy, I know that. People say terrible hypotheticals when they're scared. But the files kept coming. A screen recording captured by my logger showed Ryan on a banking portal I recognized from his family office, drilling into transfer limits, toggling international wires, pausing longest over branches in the Caymans and Singapore. He took screenshots and saved them to a folder named Household Admin. He titled one, Liquidation Timeline. Victoria's phone, mirrored when she connected, just to charge for a minute, to my office dock, held text threads that made my stomach crawl. Not affection, but logistics. She asked about beneficiary designations, like she was ordering pastries. She forwarded him a link to an article about surviving spouse rights in California and asked, "Does this override her trust?" He replied with a lawyer's name and 3 bullet points. In one exchange, she wrote, "Make sure the life policy is current." He answered with a PDF and all premiums paid. They weren't clumsy at all. They were meticulous. I began cataloging everything the way I had taught my teams to handle incident response: time, source, method, corroboration. I exported audio to lossless, hashed files, stored copies offsite. I printed nothing. Paper feels safe, but it bleeds. I told no one. Not even the one friend who would have dragged me out of the house in her pajamas. Silence felt like both shield and evidence locker. Meanwhile, the performance continued. Victoria arrived one afternoon with sunflowers and a tiny envelope. Inside was a note about how proud she was of me, how I had changed what was possible for girls who love computers. She hugged me, and I felt the tremor in my own hands as I patted her back. Ryan returned from Miami smiling, tan lines ghosting his shirt cuffs. He poured wine and asked about my roadmap as if we were simply two professionals debriefing the market. When he stepped into the pantry to take a call, the outlet camera caught him opening my honey file on his phone. 2 minutes later, a silent text hit my screen. He scrolled, screenshot, forwarded. To Victoria. I started noticing their choreography. If Victoria was at the house, Ryan wouldn't need to fly that week. If Ryan was away, Victoria would come by to keep me company. When I scheduled a late-night video call with Europe, both of them found reasons to leave me alone in the study, the same room where the keystrokes spelled out searches like change beneficiary without spouse notification and INTL wire holding periods. I tested them once. Over dinner, I mentioned, offhand, that my attorney had suggested a full review of my estate plan after the acquisition. Ryan's fork paused midair, then resumed. He asked which firm, tone perfectly neutral. Victoria squeezed my forearm. That's so responsible, she said brightly. You work too hard to leave loose ends. Later that night, a new keyword spike hit my server. Their conversation in the kitchen, low and sharp. Ryan, we accelerate. Victoria, timeline. Ryan, soon. The next morning, he left for Miami again. He kissed me and told me to sleep. Victoria texted a selfie from a cafe 2 blocks away. I stood at the sink, coffee going cold, and listened to the house breathe. I had built systems my whole life to predict human behavior at scale. Now I was living inside a model I didn't want to believe, 2 lines converging on a single outcome, erasing me as if I were a variable to be zeroed out. They called it a second honeymoon, a pretty phrase dressed in sea salt and light. Ryan booked a week on a white yacht with a name that sounded like a promise, and Victoria helped pick the linens, as if sisters always help choose the sheets for the bed you are meant to die in. We flew to Florida, smiling for strangers in the airport, my hand tucked in Ryan's elbow while Victoria walked slightly behind us, playing the part of doting sister and spontaneous +1. The air tasted like sunscreen and jet fuel. On the dock, the yacht gleamed like a clean lie. The captain shook my hand and said the seas would be mild. The crew showed us to a stateroom that smelled faintly of lemon oil and money. Everything was curated, pale wood, chrome, towels rolled into tight white spirals. Outside, pelicans skimmed the water like low thoughts. The plan, Ryan said, was simple. Sunrise swims, afternoon naps, dinners on deck under a sky as big as forgiveness. He kissed my forehead. Victoria clapped softly, as if we had already succeeded at being happy. For a day and a half, we played at romance. We cruised south along the coast, the shoreline drifting by like a slideshow from a life I might have wanted. Ryan offered to rub sunscreen on my shoulders. Victoria snapped photos from flattering angles and sent them to me with little heart emojis. At dusk, the yacht cut across a calm that felt arranged. The horizon turned bruised purple, and the water took on the color of secrets. That evening, the crew served dinner early and then disappeared with practiced discretion. They turn in around 9, Ryan said, leaning on the rail, sleeves rolled, expression open. Long day for them. Victoria set a portable speaker on the table, soft music, the kind that makes people pour one more glass. I tried to swallow the unease that had been living under my ribs since the airport. I told myself that fear is sometimes the price of love. I told myself to breathe. Ryan brought out a pair of cocktails he said the chef had mixed just for us, something bright with a slice of star fruit and a sprig of herbs I couldn't name. To us, he said. The glass was cold in my fingers. I lifted it, the ice knocking politely against the side, and took a small sip. Bitterness flashed like a match struck in my mouth. Not the pleasant bite of Amaro, Not the dark kiss of grapefruit pith. Bitter like medicine. Bitter like metal. I held the swallow against my tongue and let the music cover the beat of my pulse. I smiled, set my glass down, and wiped a non-existent drop from my lip with the back of my hand. It's strong, I said, as if I were simply out of practice with pleasure. They watched me. I've learned how to measure a person by the muscles around their eyes. His stayed smooth, hers glittered. I curled my fingers around the rim, tilted the glass toward my mouth, then stumbled a small theatrical sway as I turned, my back to them, my arm extending over the water. The liquid slipped from the glass like a confession and disappeared into the dark. When I faced them again, I finished the performance, a little cough, a soft laugh. I think I need to sit down. Of course, Ryan said, voice warm enough to boil. He guided me to the lounging bench near the stern. The sea made that low shushing sound that adults make for children who ask hard questions. Victoria started telling a story about a mutual friend's wedding, her voice rising and falling, buying time. I leaned back and let my head tip to the side, lids half lowered. Sleepy was a costume I'd worn during endless summit weeks. It still fit. I slowed my breathing. I let my arms go heavy. The sky above the canopy was a handful of salt scattered across velvet. I listened. Tonight is the best chance, Ryan said quietly, the words close enough that they seemed to settle against my skin. The crew is resting, the sea is calm. Finally, Victoria answered, a tiny spark of applause in that single word. No currents, no traffic. The safety rail is low, Ryan added. She's tired. No one will question it. They were so calm, so administrative, like accountants balancing a ledger before close. I counted the seconds between their sentences the way I used to count seconds between server pings. 3, 2, 4. My heart ticked in my throat, measuring me. And then, footsteps. The soft sigh of deckboards. A whisper of clothing. I heard the glass clink again and knew there'd be a smear of residue on the rim, a story ready for the official narrative. The night breeze pressed against my cheek and brought the smell of citrus, of lotion, of money that has never been scared of the dark. They came closer. I kept my breathing even, pretend sleep breathing, slow and reasonable. My fingers curled under the cushion, searching for something to anchor me. Fabric. Foam. Not enough. I had the sudden, insane thought that if I could just say the right sentence, the scene would turn, the jump cut would reverse, and we'd all go inside to watch a movie like people who don't sharpen their love into weapons. Victoria's shadow crossed my legs first, narrow and purposeful. Ryan's shadow spread beside it, broader, patient. Ash, he murmured, the name gentle in his mouth, a sound I had trusted. Let's get you to bed. I opened my eyes, fast, letting adrenaline jackknife me upright. For a breath, surprise broke their symmetry. Then hands. Ryan's hand was already at my shoulder, iron wrapped in warmth. I twisted, but his grip found purchase, pulling me back, reminding me that the body you've slept beside is also a cage you taught to fit your proportions. Air scraped. The ocean murmured. I pushed against him, felt tendon and bone, the gym hours I'd ignored coiling under his shirt. Victoria stepped in close, closer than sisters stand. Our eyes met. The world narrowed to the distance between her pupils and mine, the old family blue now flat. I thought of the night she held my bouquet and whispered that I deserved everything. I thought of the way our mother once tucked the same blanket over both of us when we pretended to sleep on the couch. Victoria lifted her hand and placed it lightly against my sternum, a gesture that could have been affection in another life. Her nails were a pale, immaculate pink. She pressed. It wasn't hard, not at first. A test. I felt the rail bite the back of my thighs. Wait, I said, but the word was air, not law. Her mouth tilted. She leaned in so close I could count the tiny freckles across the bridge of her nose. Say hello to the sharks, little sister. The push was clean. Efficient. She knew exactly where to put the force. Ryan's hand tightened and then released, the way you release a paper airplane after drawing your arm back for a long, generous throw. The rails slipped under me, the sky flipped end over end, and the deck lights skated across my vision. Cold hit first, sharp as a door slamming, then the sound, A muffled roar, a world swallowing itself. The taste of salt filled my mouth, and the dark pressed everywhere at once, over my eyes, in my ears, under my tongue. One moment I was a woman on a boat, wife, sister, founder. The next I was a shape falling through black water, the night closing above me like a lid while their voices, my husband's and my sister's, blurred into the wind and were gone. The ocean closed over me, but muscle memory beat panic to the surface. I kicked out of the shock, counted to 3 like Coach taught us to do after a cold plunge, and let my lungs remember they knew how to work. Salt burned my throat. I surfaced near the stern light, a halo shrinking as the yacht glided forward. I rolled onto my back, shoes heavy, dress dragging, and forced myself to become a machine. Breathe, kick, float, scan. In college, I swam the 500 free like it was liturgy, lap after lap, heart becoming metronome. The body you train is a savings account. You pray you never need to withdraw everything at once. And tonight I did. I kicked out of my shoes, let the dress slip from my shoulders, and moved into a side stroke that conserved heat and air. The water was dark glass, the sky salt and black. Somewhere behind me, the deck lights dimmed. Somewhere above, stars kept their old promises. The bracelet on my wrist hummed once when I pressed the hidden button's GPS beacon on low-power pulses, paired to a satellite number no one but me knew. Not perfect, but enough to write a breadcrumb trail across a map. The belt I had sewn into my skirt waistband during a sleepless week clicked against my hip, the waterproof zipper holding 3 things, cash folded tight, a laminated ID with a name that wasn't mine, and a thumb drive in a sealed pouch. For a while, I stayed still, letting my body adjust, listening. Nothing but ocean. The yacht didn't circle back. Of course it didn't. I floated, conserving heat, timing my breaths to the lift and drop of the swell. I thought of the phrase Victoria used when we were teenagers, and the tide was rough. The sea wants to keep you. It really did. But I refused. Every 100 strokes, I paused to float, slow my pulse, check the bracelet's tiny LED as if prayer had a color. Time thickened. My shoulders burned, my calves trembled, my teeth began to chatter in small, private Morse code. A sound came thin across the water, then again, an engine, sputtering, not sleek like the yacht, but stubborn. I raised my arm and swept it wide twice. The dark stayed dark. I blew 2 long whistleless exhalations, the kind you learn to use when you have no whistle left. The engine faded, then returned stronger, like whoever was steering had second thoughts. I lifted both arms, palms open, and shouted until my voice felt like torn cloth. The boat that slid into view was not polished. It was a Cuban fishing skiff, the kind you can smell before you see diesel. Bait, old son. 2 men peered over the side with faces carved by weather and work. For a beat, we regarded one another as if we had appeared in each other's dreams. Aida, one called softly. See, I answered, the word almost a sob. Poor favor. They hauled me in with efficient gentleness, under my arms, careful of the bracelet. My body hit the deck and argued with gravity. The older man stripped off his jacket and draped it over my shoulders. The younger handed me a plastic bottle of water that tasted like a miracle left too long in a truck. I managed, gracias. Muchas gracias, the words clumsy but sincere. The older man's eyes took in what I wasn't saying. He motioned for me to sit, and the skiff moved again, the bow rising and falling like a tired chest. Nombre? He asked. I hesitated, then gave the one on the laminated card. He nodded as if all names were equal at sea. I opened the belt pouch with numb hands, counted fast, and pressed a thick stack of bills into his palm. Silencio, I said, tapping my lips. Nadia. Poor favor. I added more, enough to put weight in the word. He stared at the money, then at me, and something like pity slipped across his features. He tucked the cash into a plastic bag that smelled of fish and rain and gave a single, solemn nod. Entiendo, he said. I believe he did. Some arrangements do not require grammar, only need. We didn't dock anywhere official. The men cut the engine and let us glide into a slip between mangroves where mosquitoes whined and the water stank of life. They helped me onto a splintering wooden walkway and led me through a maze of shadowed paths to a tin-roofed shed that hummed with a refrigerator and an old radio. There was a woman inside, gray braid, spare. She pressed a towel into my hands, pointed to a stack of faded men's t-shirts, and turned her back while I changed. When I emerged, she poured me coffee and spoke softly, a Spanish lullaby of questions and warnings. I caught enough. No police, no names, no questions. I nodded and offered another fan of bills. She accepted only half, then folded my fingers over the rest. Para después, she murmured. For later. I slept in an aluminum chair for an hour, or 10 minutes, or a lifetime. When I woke, the men were loading crates into a van that had once been white. The older one gestured. Vamos. I climbed in. We drove without headlights for a stretch that felt like we were slipping between pages. At a crossroads, he stopped, pointed down the darker road, and handed me a cheap flip phone and a small paper map with an X the size of hope. Taxi, he said. Hotel Pequeño. Silencio. He looked at me then, eyes kind and firm. So I walked. The bracelet's light blinked blandly under its casing. I pressed my tongue to the roof of my mouth to stop the trembling and kept to the shadow of buildings until the road produced a convenience store and, beside it, a taxi dozing under a broken street lamp. The driver took me to a low motel with a faded sign and a row of doors that looked like missing teeth. I paid cash. The clerk didn't ask for ID. I showered until my skin hurt, then slept in a t-shirt that said Key Largo Fishing Derby 2017. Morning came in slats through the blinds. On the motel TV, two people I knew opened their mouths and spoke lines they had rehearsed. Ryan wore the tie he put on for funerals and investors. Victoria's hair looked like she had chosen a softer brush. They stood on my front steps with microphones under their chins and the grief of great actors in their eyes. Ashley died in an accident, Ryan said, voice catching perfectly on died. A tragic fall, Victoria added, her hand squeezing his sleeve. We loved her so much. They said the right words about the Coast Guard and the search. They asked for privacy. They thanked the public. I watched them from a bed that had seen too many other sad stories and tasted the sour metal of the cocktail again at the back of my throat. When a reporter asked about what happens next, Ryan glanced at Victoria and looked down, like a man humbled by fate. The lower screen ticker crawled, tech billionaire presumed dead in yachting accident. I muted the sound and let their faces move without voices. My phone, the flip one, sat in my palm like a dare. I did not call anyone. I did not call my parents, who would learn about their daughter from morning television. I did not call my lawyer. Silence was the only thing strong enough to protect me while I decided what kind of life could be made from the pieces still in my pockets. By afternoon, the feed changed. There were no more pleas, only paperwork. A news site ran a headline, Spouse and Sister File Inheritance Documents 1 day after accident. The accompanying photo caught them leaving a courthouse side door, eyes lowered, dressed in grief as carefully as one selects black shoes. I wondered if the clerk complimented their efficiency. In the motel's dim light, I made 3 calls from the flip phone, each to a number I had memorized years earlier. The first was to a lawyer who had once bulldozed a hedge fund through a bribery scandal and walked away without mud on his shoes. The second was to a former FBI investigator I'd hired as a consultant during an old corporate extortion scare. He'd retired early after realizing he had more scruples than his boss. The third was to a cybersecurity expert who owed me a favor big enough to bend a city block, an introverted genius who lived in hoodies and understood the underside of the internet the way fishermen understand tides. We met in a rented room behind a pawn shop 3 towns north of Miami. I wore a baseball cap and sunglasses that didn't flatter me and the name on my temporary ID. I told them everything. The drink. The push. The ocean. The clip where my sister asked, "How many days will it take to receive the money after her death?" and my husband answering, "No more than 3. None of them flinched. That's what I wanted. Professionals who had cataloged the worst of human nature and still believed in procedure. The lawyer, Green, kept his questions clean and specific. "Chain of custody?" he asked. I showed him the hashes, the timestamps, the mirrored logs. Corroboration. I outlined the bank portal captures, the text threads, the gate logs. He wrote names on a yellow legal pad with the patience of a surgeon. We'll need warrants, he said. We'll need to make this government business, not personal revenge. I nodded and tried not to think about revenge curling like a hot wire behind my ribs. The former agent, Torres, mapped a plan with easy, steady hands. We'll keep you buried, he said. We get the statements, the recordings, the paper trail. We pull financials that show motive and movements. We find the weak flank. Everybody has one. He said it the way swimmers say kick, as if our bodies were built for this. The cybersecurity expert, June, unpacked a laptop and turned my scattered vigilance into a war room. He strengthened my hidden network, funneled the data to secure servers, and tunneled into places I had only ever pointed at. They're sloppy, he murmured, fingers moving like good music. He thinks he's clever because he uses the family office. He isn't. The auditors will hang him with his own metadata. He smiled without humor. And she's logging into everything from your home Wi-Fi as if grief gives you admin rights. We worked in concentric circles. Green reached out to a U.S. Attorney's Office contact he trusted more than he liked, floating concerns from a confidential witness. Torres quietly visited a county detective he'd mentored, handing over a sanitized tip about probable financial fraud. June traced wire attempts in Sandbox, flagged proxy accounts, and found a camera I didn't even know I had installed, a redundancy in a motion sensor that had picked up their preparation in my kitchen the week before the trip. I paid the fisherman's family more money than would ever feel like enough. I erased my trail. New phone, new car, new hair that looked like it belonged to a person who never stayed long. I slept with a folder under my pillow and my bracelet in a drawer. Every morning, Torres texted me a single word, alive. Every night, June sent me a digest of captured data with a timestamp and a joke terrible enough to make me love him a little. Meanwhile, the world kept turning without me. Ryan and Victoria wore coordinated sorrow on television, then moved briskly to probate court. The filings were public. Green printed them and spread them on the pawn shop table like maps. They couldn't wait, he said softly, almost to himself. They never do. He worked the phones like a concert pianist, persuading, pressuring, reminding. Warrants began to bloom in the background, quiet, precise, sealed. It turned out the government enjoyed catching fish that thought they were too pretty for nets. We gathered more than evidence. We gathered a narrative. Their messages showed the timeline of a conspiracy, their searches showed preparation, their bank activities showed hunger, and the camera, but that camera gave us the soul of it. 3 months later, everything was set. Green handed me a folder with my new official identity, complete with enough detail to get me through a dozen checkpoints. June triple-checked our dead man switch. If anything happened to me, the entire archive would propel itself into the inboxes of 3 different newsrooms and 1 congresswoman with a flair for hearings. You're insured, he said, eyes soft behind smudged glasses. Go home. My home was a word, then a fence, then a driveway that felt longer than the state of Florida. I returned at night, the way regret does. The gate opened to the code I still remembered. Wealth rarely imagines it needs to change its locks. Inside, the house smelled like fresh fruits and resolution. Torres's team had been through earlier, quiet as professional remorse, leaving exactly what I needed where I needed it. In the dining room sat a box on the table, white, tied with a black ribbon. My handwriting on the tag, for you. I waited in the shadows where we used to set birthday cakes. I wore flat shoes and a heart that didn't wobble anymore. Cars pulled up. Voices. A key at the door. The sound of people who believe in their immunity. They came in carrying their separate performances. Ryan loosened his tie with the hand that had let me go. Victoria's eyes were shiny with a permanent sheen. They saw the box at the same time and moved toward it as if it might purr. Did you order something? Victoria asked, a bright tremor in her voice. Ryan tipped the lid. Inside, hard drives labeled with dates and hashes, printouts with lines highlighted in the color of blood oranges, a slim folder embossed with the Department of Justice seal, and on top, an envelope heavier than it looked. He opened the envelope, lowering his head so that his face disappeared for a heartbeat. When he looked up, the blood had left his cheeks. "Surprise," I stated, stepping out of the dark. "I've been waiting for you guys." For a breath, we were teenagers in Charleston again. The pause before the garage door opened, the moment you decide which version of events you'll tell your parents. Then the front door exploded inward under a fist that had a warrant behind it. FBI, agents shouted in a chorus that sounded like justice rather than television. Black windbreakers ate the room. The agent in front read names with a voice that had practiced all day to remain a metronome. Ryan Lee. Victoria Riley. One moved to Ryan, two flanked Victoria. Ryan reacted the way men like him do when their story stops obeying them. He went feral. He seized the kitchen knife from the counter, a ridiculous, domestic blade, and bolted toward the window like it owed him an exit. An agent met him mid-stride with controlled force, the kind designed to protect everyone in the room, even the man who moments earlier would have fed me to the ocean. Ryan hit the hardwood face down, wrists cuffed in a gesture that translated into every language. And Victoria didn't run. She folded, as if her bones remembered how to become childlike when cornered. She sobbed, mascara finally smearing authentically, and reached for me with hands that had once adjusted my veil. "Ashley, please," she cried, voice breaking on my name the way it hadn't when she told the cameras I was gone. "I didn't mean," she stopped, hearing herself. "I mean, I didn't know." Then she stopped again, hearing that too. I didn't step back. I didn't step forward. I watched the agents guide her into her own consequences. Green appeared from the hall with a U.S. attorney I had only seen in headshots. Papers were exchanged. Rights were read. Evidence was cataloged into bins with chain of custody stickers that would survive a hurricane. The box on the table sat open, unassuming, festive in its earlier life and brutal now. I closed the lid gently as if tucking in a child. Then I looked at them, my husband and my sister, bookended by law and procedure. "You could have kept the love," I said quietly. "But you chose my money." No one answered. The house, at last, was honest. Outside, red and blue lights turned my front lawn into a slow, silent carnival. Inside, footsteps and radios moved toward the door, toward cars with cages and futures without windows. The trial was a season of measured voices, a long corridor where everyone walked in straight lines. I sat behind the prosecution table most days, a dark blazer, a new haircut, glasses I did not need but which kept strangers from recognizing me too quickly. When the recordings played, Victoria asking how many days it would take, Ryan saying no more than 3, the room held a silence that felt like weather. Jurors stared at the monitors with the same expression people have when watching storms form on radar. The lawyers laid out timelines that matched the calendars I had kept in secret. Bank transfers. Search histories. The yacht itinerary with the crew's sleep schedule. It was all so tidy on the screen, the kind of clarity that had been denied to me until it mattered to strangers. Green never let the word revenge drift into the air. He said justice, conspiracy, attempted murder, financial motive, predicate acts. Torres testified about investigative procedure. June explained hashes and chains of custody in plain, patient language that made the jurors nod. When my turn came, the prosecutor kept it narrow. I told the truth the way one reads a lab result, calm, precise, without apology. The defense tried to make me sound paranoid, a billionaire founder who saw plots where there were none. They failed the moment the video showed my kitchen at night, my husband's voice saying accelerate, my sister's voice echoing the calm of the sea. On the day of sentencing, the judge spoke for a long time about trust as a public value. He said marriage was not a contract for cover, that kinship did not negate criminal intent. He looked at Ryan with an expression that contained neither pity nor rage and pronounced 35 years. He turned to Victoria, my sister, my first rival, the person who knew my childhood freckles, and said 20. There was a murmur in the gallery, the soft sound people make when they are surprised and secretly satisfied. And I did not cry. My tears had been used up in rooms without windows. I walked out of the courthouse into late light that made the city look gentle. Reporters shouted questions that belonged to other lives. I kept moving. After the appeal windows closed and the paperwork settled, I did what I had promised myself to do when I was treading water under a dark sky. I left. I changed my appearance in small, reversible ways, cut my hair, dyed it warmer, traded contacts for those glasses I had adopted, softened my clothes. I moved to San Diego, to a house that faced west with quiet confidence. The ocean there is a different blue, less theatrical than Florida's, more like a working friend. Money makes reinvention easier, but it does not provide meaning. I needed something that turned my survival into a service. The Rebirth Foundation began as an idea scrawled on a napkin, practical help for people betrayed by those closest to them. Not just legal referrals, though we offer those. Not just emergency funds, though we provide them. We built a triage program, 1 intake call, 3 rapid actions, secure accounts, secure housing, secure evidence. We hired counselors who knew the language of financial abuse. We partnered with shelters and clinics. We trained volunteers to sit with someone at a bank while they closed a joint account with shaking hands. I kept my name out of the press. The foundation's site listed a different director as public face, a woman with a voice people trust. I showed up where the work happened, the intake room at 9 p.m., the courthouse bench at 7 a.m., the grocery store with gift cards we disguised as survey rewards so no one had to announce their need. Some nights, I drove my old Prius to a motel with a backpack full of prepaid phones and toothbrushes and sat in a parking lot texting a stranger through her first independent purchase of dinner in months. On those nights, I felt like a mechanic fixing a stalled engine on the side of a highway. The car would run. The road would continue. The driver would one day sing again. 3 months after the sentencing, I went back to Florida. Not for a hearing, not for interviews. For the water. The captain of a small charter agreed to take me out at sunset without questions. We motored past parasails and laughter until the shore turned into a thin suggestion. He cut the engine and the boat drifted. The sea was calm, the way it had been the night I went over the rail. I held a bundle of white roses in my lap, cool petals against my skin. I had written no notes, made no speeches in my head. Some grief requires an absence of language. I stood, careful with the motion, and lowered the flowers into the water one by one. They fanned out around the hull, small moons. The captain stayed back, the kind of respectful distance people learn after a lifetime of ferrying other people's moments. I watched the roses float, each one a soft punctuation mark on a sentence that had almost ended too soon. They tried to destroy me for money, I said quietly, more to the water than to the man at the wheel, and that is what gave me new strength. I thought about my family. The parents who once told us to share, and the daughter who learned the opposite lesson from the adults she loved. I thought about the little girl version of me who wanted only a computer and a closed door and a screen that said yes when the logic finally ran. I had lost my husband and my sister, not to death exactly, but to a kind of expensive emptiness. And now I had gained mornings where the first thing I felt was not dread. I had gained the ability to sit with someone and tell them they were not crazy, that betrayal is not a mirror of your worth, that love without respect is a method, not a miracle. Back in San Diego, I hung a photo of the ocean at that Floridian latitude on my wall, not as a trophy, but as a compass. When donors asked why the foundation's name was Rebirth, I told them the truth, because resurrection is not a religious monopoly, it is a human skill. You do not climb out of a grave once, you do it over and over, choosing breath and boundaries, choosing dignity in the presence of people who never offered it to you freely. The motto we printed on the back of our first pamphlet was not market-tested. It was mine. It still is. Sometimes the best gift is coming back alive when you've already been buried. And now, Ryan will age in a place with fixed schedules and fluorescent nights. Victoria will learn to live inside a story she did not write alone. None of that returns the years they took from me, the easy holidays that will never exist. I wake early most days. I make tea and open my laptop and scroll through the overnight intake logs. Some mornings there is a message from a woman in a small town asking how to keep her wages from being siphoned off by a boyfriend with her passwords. Some mornings a note from a son whose parents have drained his trust fund. We are not saints. We are a crew. We pull people from the water and point to the shore. Family is important, but boundaries are even more important. I changed my appearance, I built a new life in San Diego, and I founded the Rebirth Foundation. Every day, I meet people who, like me, were betrayed by those they trusted most. And every time I tell them my story, I remind them, survival is not weakness. It is power. It is proof that nothing, not even betrayal, can bury you if you refuse to stay buried. Do not hand your trust to people who treat it like a weapon. Even those who share your last name or your bed can turn against you. And if they do, stand tall, fight back, and write your own ending. And now, I want to ask you something. Have you ever experienced betrayal from those you loved most? How did you survive it, and what did it teach you? Share your own story in the comments below. I will be reading them, because I know how much it means to be heard. And if my story struck a chord with you, please, do me a favor, hit that like and subscribe buttons, and stay with me. That will remind you that you are not alone, no matter how dark it feels.